Our world would be empty without the stories that hold our past. Epic chronicles are the anchors that kept entire civilizations from fading into silence, and the storytellers who preserved them are the unsung heroes of human memory. By the end of this, you will know the secret methods these guardians used to save our history from oblivion. How did a single poem save a kingdom's identity? What hidden code allowed monks to rescue ancient knowledge from fire and war? We will uncover the remarkable tales of these memory keepers, from bards to scribes, and reveal how their work still shapes who we are today. What part of your own story would you want a future generation to remember? A single illuminated manuscript, glowing in the quiet of a monastery, holds far more than ink and parchment. It contains the soul of a civilization. These epic chronicles were never just simple lists of kings and battles. They are grand, sweeping narratives that masterfully wove together history, myth, and the deepest cultural values into a single, powerful tapestry. Their purpose was not merely to inform, but to define a people, to give them a shared identity and a moral compass for the future. They served as the living memory of entire societies, encoding everything from laws and traditions to the core lessons that held a community together. The great historian Ibn Khaldun observed that the past resembles the future more than one drop of water resembles another. He understood that these chronicles were the key to seeing the recurring patterns of human experience, allowing each new generation to learn from the triumphs and failures of those who came before. What truly sets an epic chronicle apart from a simple historical account? First is its immense narrative scope. It does not just record an event, it places it within a vast, interconnected story of a people's origins, destiny, and place in the world. Then there is its symbolic depth. Facts are often layered with allegory, where a great flood might represent divine judgment, or a heroic quest symbolizes the struggle for wisdom. This blending was not seen as dishonest, but as a way to convey deeper truths about human nature and the proper order of society. Finally, these chronicles played a crucial role in legitimizing rulers and institutions. By tracing a king's lineage back to a god or a legendary hero, the story cemented his right to rule and the stability of the realm. Consider the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. It does more than just note that a battle happened in a certain year. It describes strange omens in the sky, interprets military defeats as divine punishment for moral failings, and celebrates victories as rewards for virtue. It creates a rich, multidimensional picture of England's early history that is as much about the soul of the people as it is about their politics. This challenges our modern, rigid separation of fact and fiction. For the keepers of these chronicles, the most important truth was not always the literal event, but the meaning derived from it. What does this tell us about our own need for stories that make sense of our world, that connect our present to a significant past? Understanding this foundational purpose, the immense weight these narratives were meant to carry, allows us to fully appreciate the extraordinary individuals who dedicated their lives to preserving them against the relentless tide of time. That campfire scene with the elder's voice rising and falling was civilization's first library. Long before ink met parchment, oral storytellers were the living, breathing archives of their people, their memories the only fortress against oblivion. These narrators were far more than entertainers. They were master technicians of memory, employing sophisticated methods to ensure their epic chronicles survived with stunning accuracy across countless generations. In West Africa, the griots held a position of immense esteem, serving as royal advisors, diplomats, and the sole living repositories of genealogies, laws, and historical accounts. To forget a line was not a simple mistake, it was to erase a piece of the world, so they crafted powerful mnemonic tools, turning history into an unforgettable performance. They used rhythmic repetition, locking key events into a predictable cadence. Formulaic phrases described heroes and cities the same way every time, creating reliable anchors within the narrative. Musical accompaniment, like the resonant notes of a kora, provided a melodic scaffold, each chord triggering the next part of the story. Consider the Epic of Sundiata, which preserves the founding of the Mali Empire. It was not read from a book but performed, the reciter's body moving with the rhythm of the tale, his voice embodying different characters, transforming a historical account into a captivating sensory experience that audiences felt in their bones. Similarly, the Norse sagas, detailing Viking voyages and family feuds, were carried across frozen seas and into new settlements, their alliterative verses and stark, powerful imagery making them impossible to forget. But these stories were not frozen in time like a recorded video. They were living entities, evolving with each telling to remain relevant to the present audience, while fiercely protecting the core truths and moral lessons at their heart. This beautiful flexibility challenges our modern obsession with a single, fixed version of history. What does the resilience of oral tradition teach us? It reveals that memory is not a solitary act but a communal one, strengthened by shared performance and collective responsibility. The story's survival depended on the entire community valuing it, listening to it, and needing it to understand themselves. This profound, collaborative system of preservation held strong for millennia, but a revolution was approaching that would fundamentally alter how humanity remembered, shifting the weight of memory from the human voice to the physical mark. The soft scratch of a quill becomes the sound of civilization saving itself. Within the hushed scriptorium of a medieval monastery, a single monk bends over a parchment page, his hand guided by a sacred duty that transcends the chill of the stone walls. These scribes were the first true archivists, transforming the ephemeral whispers of oral tales and fragile records into physical objects built to endure. Their work was not merely mechanical copying, it was an act of intellectual and spiritual devotion. In ancient Mesopotamia, long before the monastic orders, scribes pressed wedge-shaped marks into wet clay tablets, recording everything from the epic adventures of Gilgamesh to the mundane details of grain shipments. These fired clay libraries ensured that the voice of Sumerian culture, silenced for thousands of years, could speak to us again across the millennia. An Egyptian scribe named Amenemop perfectly captured this sentiment when he wrote, "The scribe, he alone, records the output of all of them." He understood that the entire machinery of a state, its laws, its economy, and its cultural soul depended entirely on the scribe's hand. The training for such a role was grueling. From childhood, apprentices in Egypt or Mesopotamia spent years mastering hundreds of complex hieroglyphic or cuneiform signs. Their materials evolved from brittle papyrus reeds to the more durable, scraped animal skins known as parchment or vellum, each sheet a precious resource. The goal was perfection, an error-free copy, because a single mistake could alter a law, corrupt a prayer, or misrepresent a king's legacy. Yet their role was far more profound than that of a human printing press. Scribes were active interpreters of history. They made critical decisions about which events to include, which to omit, and how to frame narratives for an unknown future audience. The Dead Sea Scrolls, hidden away in desert caves, are a powerful testament to this. The meticulous efforts of Jewish scribes preserved not only religious texts but also community rules and apocalyptic visions, offering modern scholars a priceless window into a pivotal era. Their careful lettering and standardized formats ensured these fragile manuscripts would survive 2,000 years. This immense responsibility forces us to ask, how did the simple act of writing transform a story from a fleeting performance into a permanent legacy? The scribe's quill gave a narrative a body, a physical vessel that could travel across continents and through centuries, creating a fragile but vital bridge from the world of spoken words to the empire of the written record. But what happens when these physical vessels, these anchors of memory, are threatened with complete annihilation? The quiet dedication of a single monk could illuminate an entire age. In the flickering candlelight of a cloistered cell, a Benedictine brother carefully dipped his quill, recording the events of the year not as a dry list of facts, but as a grand tapestry where every battle, every famine, and every royal succession was a potential message from God. These monastic chroniclers were the guardians of the medieval world, blending meticulous observation with deep theological reflection to create narratives that gave meaning to a society emerging from the chaos of fallen empires. Their works, like the Venerable Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People or Gregory of Tours' History of the Franks, served a dual purpose. They were both a spiritual guide, interpreting human events through the lens of divine providence, and a vital record for nascent kingdoms desperate for a coherent identity. Bede himself expressed this multifaceted calling, stating his devotion to scripture, monastic discipline, and the sheer delight of learning, teaching, and writing. His life was a testament to the idea that preserving knowledge was an act of faith. The structure of their chronicles was uniquely suited to this task. They were often written as annals, simple year-by-year accounts that might note a harsh winter alongside a Viking raid and a miraculous healing, weaving the agricultural, political, and spiritual into a single cosmic framework. This method created a rich, layered history where a comet in the sky was as significant as a coronation, both seen as parts of a divine plan. Their role extended far beyond recording current events. In their scriptoria, these monks became the unsung rescuers of classical civilization. As they meticulously copied manuscripts, they saved the works of Aristotle, Virgil, and Cicero from vanishing forever during centuries of upheaval and instability. A chronicle like the one attributed to Fredegar did not merely list Frankish kings. It wove their history with legendary Trojan origins, crafting a powerful foundational myth that legitimized Merovingian rule and united a fragmented people. What motivated this lifelong, painstaking dedication? It was a conviction that their work served a purpose far greater than themselves. They were building a permanent record for God and for future generations, ensuring that the light of knowledge, both sacred and secular, would continue to glow through Europe's darkest hours. Their quiet labor in isolated abbeys created the very threads that would later be gathered by Renaissance scholars, reconnecting a continent with its own forgotten past. But while monks preserved knowledge in the West, a different, vibrant tradition of scholarship was flourishing under the banner of a new faith, one that would assemble the scattered pieces of ancient wisdom into a magnificent new whole. A shadow moved through the glittering halls of imperial power, a quiet figure with brush and ink whose work would outlast any throne. Court historians were embedded in the very heart of authority, tasked with a monumental and often perilous duty to transform the raw, chaotic events of a reign into a polished legacy for the ages. They were more than just record keepers. They were architects of memory, crafting narratives that could either immortalize a ruler as a sage king or condemn them as a tyrant. Their position granted them unparalleled access to the inner workings of empire, from secret battle plans and private councils to diplomatic letters that held the fate of nations. This intimacy with power gave their chronicles a unique depth, but it also forced them to walk a razor's edge between truth and survival. The Roman historian Tacitus captured this moral burden perfectly when he observed that the more he thought about history, the more he was convinced that the duty of the historian is to ensure that virtue is recorded and that evil men fear the judgment of posterity. This was the ultimate check on a ruler's power, the knowledge that their actions would be weighed and recorded for all time. In ancient China, Sima Qian's records of the grand historian set a towering precedent for this difficult balance. He assembled a comprehensive history of China that dared to include criticisms of emperors alongside their achievements, a courageous act that ultimately cost him his freedom when his objectivity provoked the wrath of Emperor Wu. Yet his work survived, becoming the model for all official Chinese histories that followed and proving that a chronicle's greatest power often lay in its stubborn fidelity to the whole truth, not just the flattering parts. This tension between official duty and personal integrity created fascinating dualities. The Byzantine court historian Procopius composed glowing public histories celebrating the building campaigns and military victories of Emperor Justinian and his wife Theodora. But in secret, he also wrote the Anecdota, a scathing, salacious account that depicted the same rulers as monstrous and corrupt. This hidden chronicle was a testament to the stories that could not be told openly, a whispered correction to the official narrative, preserved in the hope that a future audience might see the full, unvarnished picture. How did these historians navigate such treacherous waters? Their methods were as varied as the empires they served. Some, like the Mughal Emperor Babur, took the task upon themselves. His Baburnama is a remarkably candid personal memoir, filled with frank admissions of military failure, moments of personal doubt, and vivid descriptions of the lands he conquered. It offers a window into the mind of a ruler who was determined to be remembered as a complex human being, not just a distant figure of state. Other chronicles, commissioned directly by the court, were inherently instruments of statecraft. They were designed to legitimize a dynasty, often by tracing its lineage back to divine or legendary ancestors, and to present its rule as a natural and benevolent force in the world. The delicate dance between fact and flattery raises a profound question for us today. When we read these official histories, are we seeing the reality of power, or merely its most carefully crafted portrait? The court historian's greatest challenge was to embed kernels of undeniable truth within the grand tapestry of imperial propaganda, ensuring that even the most polished legacy could not completely erase the complexities of the human story. Their work reminds us that history is never just a collection of facts, but a narrative constantly being negotiated between the powerful and those who hold the pen. A bard's satire could topple a king without a single sword being drawn. In the Celtic halls of Wales and Ireland, the poet held a power that rivaled the warrior, his words a force that could either cement a ruler's legacy or unravel it entirely. These bards were the living libraries of their people, their minds meticulously trained to hold thousands of lines of genealogies, legal precedents, and epic cycles like the Mabinogion and the Tain Bo Cuelnge. To hear a bard recite was to witness history as a living, breathing entity, his voice accompanied by the haunting melody of a harp, weaving tales of Arthurian quests and mythical cattle raids that defined the very soul of Celtic identity. Their training was a grueling intellectual marathon, spanning up to 12 years, where apprentices learned complex poetic meters and formulas to lock an immense oral archive into memory. This was not for mere entertainment, it was for cultural survival. The legendary Irish bard Imogen expressed this profound connection in his chant, "I am the wind on the sea, I am the wave of the ocean," positioning the poet as a conduit between the natural world, the gods, and human experience. His words were not a boast but a statement of purpose, to give voice to the forces that shaped his people's world. This gave the bard a unique and protected status in society. In Gaelic tradition, the fili, or high poets, were granted legal immunity, allowing them to travel freely between warring tribes. Their most feared weapon was satire, a poetic curse believed to have real, physical power. A well-crafted verse of ridicule could supposedly blight a king's crops, cover his face in boils, or destroy his public standing, forcing rulers to heed the bard's counsel or risk ruin. This artistic power enforced social contracts and held authority in check, proving that the pen, or rather the spoken word, was indeed mightier than the sword. Their epic chronicles, like the Táin, did more than preserve pre-Christian myths of shape-shifting heroes and epic conflicts. They blended these ancient stories with more recent historical events, creating a cohesive narrative that explained who the Celts were and what they valued. Even under foreign pressure and cultural suppression, the bards adapted their art. They subtly wove contemporary struggles and symbols of resistance into the familiar forms of traditional tales, ensuring their stories remained relevant and their people's spirit remained unbroken. What does this enduring tradition reveal? It shows us that collective memory, when carried in the lyrical, powerful vessel of poetry, becomes an act of identity itself. The Bard's Chronicle was not a relic, it was a weapon, a comfort, and an unbroken thread connecting a people to their ancestral voice, proving that the most resilient history is often the one set to a melody. A bustling library in Abbasid Baghdad was a crossroads of the entire known world, its shelves groaning with scrolls translated from Greek, leather-bound codices from Persia, and astronomical charts from India. Here, scholars like al-Tabari undertook a monumental task, synthesizing this ocean of knowledge into encyclopedic chronicles that became bridges between ancient civilizations and the emerging medieval world. These Arab and Persian historians were not mere compilers, they were pioneers of a rigorous new historical method. They developed a sophisticated system of source evaluation, known as isnad, or chain of transmission, to verify the reliability of each account they recorded. This meticulous approach demanded that every story be traced back through a line of credible witnesses, separating rumor from documented fact with a scholarly precision that was unprecedented for its time. Their masterworks, like al-Tabari's History of the Prophets and Kings, did more than just document the rise of Islam and the expansion of caliphates. They wove together political, geographical, and biographical threads into a breathtakingly comprehensive tapestry of human endeavor. The traveler Ibn Battuta journeyed for 30 years from the shores of West Africa to the courts of China, gathering oral testimonies and first-hand observations that filled his chronicles with vibrant, cross-cultural detail. This cosmopolitan outlook was a guiding principle. The historian al-Masudi, who traveled as far as Madagascar and the Caspian Sea, famously declared that the past is a mirror for the future. He saw history not as a dry record of bygone events, but as an essential guide for governance, ethics, and understanding the recurring cycles of human society. This philosophical depth reached its zenith with Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah, a revolutionary introduction to history that proposed grand theories of social cohesion and the rise and fall of dynasties, laying the groundwork for modern sociology and historiography. But these chronicles were also acts of cultural preservation and identity. In Persia, the poet Ferdowsi devoted his life to composing the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, a massive epic in verse that resurrected the nation's pre-Islamic mythology and history. Written in pure Persian at a time of Arab political dominance, his work single-handedly revitalized the Persian language and cemented a national identity that has endured for 1,000 years. How did these scholars achieve such a delicate balance between religious narrative and empirical observation? They approached their task with the belief that all knowledge, whether revealed through faith or discovered through rational inquiry, was part of a single divine truth. Their works became multifaceted cultural repositories, blending geographical descriptions, biographical dictionaries, and philosophical reflections into a unified whole. This scholarly rigor and expansive vision made their chronicles indispensable, creating transcultural histories that would later find their way into European libraries, fueling the fires of the Renaissance and reminding us that the light of civilization is often carried by those who build bridges, not walls. A Florentine scholar's study held a quiet rebellion. Surrounded by newly discovered manuscripts of Cicero and Livy, thinkers like Petrarch were not merely collecting old texts, they were forging a new relationship with time itself. They sought to reconcile the spiritual truths of Christian theology with the worldly wisdom of classical philosophy, believing that history was the key to a more complete understanding of humanity. This movement, Renaissance humanism, revived a practice that had lain dormant for centuries: critical historiography. It was a radical shift away from the medieval chronicler's view of history as a simple unfolding of God's providence. Instead, these scholars insisted on returning to primary sources, analyzing the very language of the texts through philology, and adopting a more secular perspective that focused on human motives and actions. For them, the past was not a predetermined divine script, but a complex tapestry of human endeavor from which practical lessons could be drawn. Figures like Leonardo Bruni used this approach in his History of the Florentine People to celebrate the idea of civic humanism, arguing that the active participation of citizens in public life, inspired by the Roman Republic, was the foundation of a flourishing state. His work broke from the cyclical models of history, presenting the story of Florence as one of tangible progress and human achievement. This new way of seeing the past had the power to dismantle centuries of belief. Lorenzo Valla famously applied his philological skills to the donation of Constantine, a document used by the papacy to claim temporal power. By analyzing the language and anachronisms in the text, Valla proved it was a forgery, demonstrating with breathtaking clarity how humanist methods could overturn the most entrenched political and religious doctrines. The Humanist Workshop was a place of intense, meticulous comparison. Scholars hunted down multiple manuscripts of a single classical work, like those of Tacitus or Suetonius, comparing every line to strip away the errors introduced by generations of copyists. Their efforts produced the first reliable editions of these Roman historians, texts that would go on to shape European political thought for generations. Machiavelli, for instance, would pore over Livy's histories not for moral lessons, but for clear-eyed analyses of power, realpolitik, and the mechanics of statecraft. What drove these individuals to look so fervently backward in order to move forward? It was a profound conviction that authenticity and context were everything. They transformed chronicling from a clerical duty into a vibrant intellectual pursuit, one that demanded skepticism, rigor, and a deep engagement with the human condition. By also beginning to write in vernacular languages, they tore down the walls that kept historical knowledge locked within a Latin-educated elite, making it accessible to merchants, artists, and a growing literate public. This passion for recovering a usable past did more than just reinterpret history. It laid the essential groundwork for the Enlightenment, fueling a belief in reason and progress that would soon sweep across the world. The clatter of Gutenberg's press echoed the sound of memory being set free. For centuries, a single illuminated manuscript was a treasure, copied by hand and accessible only to the privileged few in monastery or court libraries. With the invention of movable type in the 15th century, the epic chronicle was suddenly unchained. It could now be stamped out in hundreds of identical copies, transforming historical knowledge from a guarded secret into a public commodity. A merchant in Antwerp or an artisan in Florence could now own a history of the world, placing the grand narratives of civilization directly into their hands. This was the true democratization of memory, and it created an insatiable hunger for the printed word. The scholar Erasmus perfectly captured this new priority when he confessed that when I get a little money, I buy books, and if any is left, I buy food and clothes. Knowledge had become a need as fundamental as shelter. Printers, however, were not just passive distributors, they became powerful new gatekeepers of history. They were businessmen, and their decisions on which chronicles to publish were driven by market demand and political safety. This meant they actively influenced which versions of the past were perpetuated and which were forgotten. A work like Hartmann Skeddel's Nuremberg Chronicle, with its hundreds of woodcut illustrations depicting biblical scenes and city views, became a bestseller. Its blend of scripture, myth, and recent history created a standardized narrative for thousands of readers, shaping a common European consciousness. The physical book itself evolved to meet this new, broader audience. Printers added indexes, cross-references, and page numbers, making chronicles more user-friendly and navigable. These features also lent the books a new air of authority, a sense that the knowledge within was organized, complete, and trustworthy in a way a unique manuscript could never be. This power to standardize and spread narratives made the printing press a revolutionary weapon. During the Reformation, Protestant printers flooded markets with chronicles that deliberately challenged the official Catholic historiography. They published accounts that framed the papacy as corrupt and cast the Protestant movement as a return to a purer, earlier church. In England, chroniclers like Richard Grafton worked directly with the Tudor court, producing histories that meticulously documented the royal lineage and celebrated the reign of the monarch. These printed chronicles were not mere records, they were potent tools of Tudor propaganda, actively forging a powerful sense of national identity that supported the regime. But this new era of mass production brought its own set of dilemmas. How did the shift from manuscript to print affect the very soul of a historical record? A scribe might make a mistake in one copy, but a typesetter's error would be replicated hundreds of times, locking inaccuracies into the public record with a new kind of permanence. And while the written word had always faced censorship, the printing press made control a central obsession of the state. Authorities established licensing systems and indexes of forbidden books, trying to stem the tide of ideas they could no longer contain. The Chronicle was now a commodity, embedded in the public consciousness with an unprecedented force, but it was also a battleground where control over the past was fought with ink, paper, and the relentless mechanical stamp of the press. A salon in Paris hummed with a new kind of energy, where the measure of history was no longer divine will, but human reason. Here, philosophers like Voltaire championed a philosophy of history that systematically stripped away the supernatural, arguing that the past must be understood through the lens of logical cause and effect. For these Enlightenment thinkers, history was not a gallery of saints and miracles, but a vast laboratory of human behavior, and its study was essential for progress. The Scottish philosopher David Hume captured this expansive view perfectly, noting that history is not only a valuable part of knowledge, but opens the door to many other parts. He saw it as the foundational discipline for creating an enlightened, critically minded citizenry, capable of questioning the world around them. This new purpose demanded new methods. Enlightenment historians applied a razor-sharp skepticism to their sources, particularly toward accounts of miraculous events, which they now dismissed as superstition or fraud. They pioneered comparative analysis, studying different civilizations side by side to identify universal patterns in politics, commerce, and social development. Edward Gibbon's monumental Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire stands as the supreme masterpiece of this approach. He wove a sweeping narrative that attributed Rome's collapse not to divine punishment, but to a complex web of internal decadence, economic stagnation, and military overreach. His elegant prose and relentless focus on human and institutional failure made the ancient world vividly relevant, offering a sobering lesson for modern empires. The scope of history itself expanded dramatically under this new gaze. It was no longer enough to catalogue the reigns of kings and the outcomes of battles. Historians now turned their attention to social customs, trade routes, artistic movements, and technological innovations. They sought to understand the everyday life of a society, believing that a nation's character was shaped as much by its economy and culture as by its rulers. This democratization of historical subject matter found its ultimate expression in the Encyclopedia of Diderot and D'Alembert. This was not a simple chronicle, but a vast repository of human knowledge where historical entries sat alongside explanations of craft techniques and scientific principles, disseminating this new, comprehensive view of the past to a hungry public. How did this fundamental shift from glorification to education transform the chronicler's role? The Enlightenment historian was no longer a servant to throne or altar, but an independent critic of both. Their work became a tool for social reform, using the past to expose the follies of the present and to argue for a more rational, just, and secular future. This intellectual project, which made history a force for revolution, would soon face its own reckoning as a new age of discovery began to unearth civilizations that challenged the very idea of a single, universal human story. A storm rages on a Scottish moor, mirroring the tempest in the heart of a poet like Sir Walter Scott. He did not see the past as a dry sequence of events to be analyzed, but as a wellspring of raw emotion and national spirit. The Romantic movement was a rebellion of the heart against the cold reason of the Enlightenment. Where philosophers saw logic and universal laws, the Romantics saw the unique soul of every nation, preserved in its epic chronicles, its folklore, and the heroic legends whispered by the common people. They argued that the true history of a people was not found in state documents, but in the ballads sung by grandmothers and the sagas recited in village squares. The German philosopher Johann Gottfried Herder gave voice to this conviction when he declared that a poet is the creator of the nation around him. He gives them a world to see and has their souls in his hand to lead them to that world. For the Romantics, the storyteller was not just a recorder but a shaper of destiny. This belief sent scholars like the brothers Grimm wandering through the German countryside, meticulously collecting fairy tales from peasants. They were not merely gathering children's stories, they were assembling what they saw as the fractured pieces of an ancient Germanic mythology, the pure, unadulterated voice of the Volk or common people. Similarly, James Macpherson's controversial publication of the Ossian Cycle, presented as the lost epic of a Celtic Homer, ignited a firestorm of nostalgic passion across Europe, even if its authenticity was disputed. It fulfilled a deep longing for a heroic, ancestral past. This search for national essence often took a political turn. In Finland, which was under Russian rule, the physician Elias Lönnrot traveled vast distances to collect traditional oral poems or runes from rural singers. He wove these fragments together into the Kalevala, a magnificent epic that gave Finns a unified mythological history, a language of heroes and gods that became a powerful tool of cultural resistance and a cornerstone of their national identity. The Romantic historian Thomas Carlyle took this focus on the individual to its extreme. In works like On Heroes, Hero Worship, and the heroic in history, he championed the great man theory, arguing that history is fundamentally the biography of a few towering figures. For Carlyle, these charismatic leaders, from Odin to Napoleon, were themselves walking epic chronicles whose passions and wills single-handedly shaped the course of events. This perspective idealized the Middle Ages as an age of faith, chivalry, and organic community, a stark contrast to the soot-stained, dehumanizing factories of the Industrial Revolution. The Romantic return to Chronicles was not an escape from the present, but a profound reaction to it. It was a search for roots, for authenticity, and for the irrational, mysterious forces that reason could not explain. What does this passionate embrace of the ancestral and the emotional tell us about the Chronicles' purpose? It reveals that beyond facts and dates, we need our history to have a soul. We need to feel a connection to the past, to hear the thunder in its myths and find our own reflection in its heroes. By infusing the dry bones of history with the blood of passion and myth, the Romantics ensured that the epic chronicle would pulse with life long into the modern age. As Spanish friar's quill hovered between salvation and destruction, in the shattered world of post-conquest Mexico, Bernardino de Sahagun did not come to erase, but to document, embarking on a project of staggering ambition. For decades, he and his team of indigenous scribes interviewed Aztec elders, compiling a 12-volume encyclopedia known as the Florentine Codex. This was not a simple record of conquest, but a profound act of cultural mediation, a bilingual chronicle in Nahuatl and Spanish that preserved a civilization's knowledge of gods, rituals, medicine, and daily life, even as that civilization was being systematically dismantled. Sahagun himself articulated this complex mission, writing, "I have written this work in order to inform the curious and to serve as a witness to the things of this land." His words reveal the deep ethical tension at the heart of his work. He was both a preserver of indigenous memory and an agent of the colonizing power that sought to control it. This dual role defined the colonial chronicler. They were often caught between a genuine intellectual curiosity about the peoples they encountered and the overwhelming pressures to justify imperial expansion or facilitate religious conversion. The Spanish explorer Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, after surviving a disastrous expedition and living for years among Native American tribes, wrote a chronicle that oscillated between portraying indigenous peoples as noble savages and detailing their sophisticated survival skills, his perspective forever altered by his own incredible journey from conquistador to captive to healer. In India, Mughal court chroniclers continued their work under the growing shadow of the British East India Company, their narratives subtly shifting to accommodate new political realities, creating hybrid texts that recorded a world in collision. To achieve any measure of accuracy, these chroniclers had to develop early ethnographic methods. They relied heavily on teams of native interpreters, cross-checked accounts from multiple sources to verify details, and commissioned elaborate illustrations of customs, clothing, and ceremonies. They were, in a sense, the first field anthropologists, trying to capture a snapshot of societies undergoing catastrophic, rapid change. Yet some indigenous voices turned the chronicle itself into a weapon of resistance. The Andean nobleman Guamán Poma de Ayala spent 30 years creating a 1,200-page letter to the King of Spain. His new chronicle and good government was a sprawling, illustrated chronicle that combined Andean history with a searing indictment of colonial abuses. He masterfully embedded his protest within a format the Spanish would recognize, using their own tools to plead for the rights of his people. In a similar act of unintended preservation, the Popol Vuh, the sacred Mayan text of creation, was transcribed in secret using the Latin alphabet by a Mayan noble, possibly under the guidance of a Dominican friar. This single act saved an entire cosmological tradition from certain extinction. How did the inherent power imbalance of these encounters shape the stories that survived? The Colonial Chronicle is always a contested archive, filtered through the lens of the outsider, often framed by a sense of cultural superiority, and sometimes warped by the desire to find evidence that supported the colonial project. The very act of preservation was tangled with distortion, yet without these fraught, complicated efforts, vast swaths of human history would have been silenced forever. They created an invaluable, if deeply imperfect, repository that modern scholars now meticulously sift through, reading between the lines to decolonize history and recover the authentic voices that echo from within the colonizer's text. A quiet revolution began in a Berlin seminar room where Leopold von Ranke instructed his students to lay aside the grand narratives of the past. His mission was to write history as it actually happened, a radical idea that would forge history into a professional science. This was the rise of academic history, a movement that shifted the chronicler's craft from the literary salon to the university archive, demanding a new kind of rigor. Ranke's famous declaration that the time was approaching to base history not on other historians' reports but on the authentic documents of eyewitnesses became the movement's battle cry. It was a call for empiricism over embellishment, for primary sources over patriotic legend. Historians now had to master new forensic skills. Paleography taught them to decipher the cramped, cryptic handwriting of medieval scribes, while diplomatics provided the tools to analyze the physical form, language, and seals of ancient charters to expose clever forgeries. This meticulous work allowed scholars to assemble vast, multi-volume national histories and produce critical editions of medieval chronicles, where every line was weighed against the evidence and annotated with a web of footnotes. The Monumenta Germaniae Historica project embodied this ambitious new spirit, a massive, collaborative effort to publish every significant source for German history in a definitive, scholarly format. Historical journals and societies sprouted across Europe, creating a system of peer review and scholarly debate that aimed to police the field for error and bias. But this relentless pursuit of objectivity came at a cost. The epic storyteller, the bard, or the romantic historian was now often viewed with suspicion. Narrative flair was frequently dismissed as unscientific, and the dry compilation of verified facts sometimes took precedence over the art of conveying the human experience. Oral traditions and popular memories, the very lifeblood of earlier chronicles, were largely excluded from this new academic canon because they could not withstand the same level of empirical scrutiny. How did this institutionalization reshape the storyteller's ancient role? The gains in precision and reliability were monumental, allowing historians to dismantle myths and build a more accurate framework of the past. Yet something vital was risked in the process. By divorcing history from its public audience and its narrative soul, the new academic chronicle risked becoming a conversation between specialists, locked away in libraries while the wider world turned to other stories. The quest for perfect objectivity had created a paradox, proving that even the most scientific chronicle is still a story told by a human being, carrying the invisible weight of their choices, their silences, and their time. A microphone captures a trembling voice, preserving a story that no official document could ever hold. This is oral history in the modern age, a powerful revival of the ancient storyteller's craft, now wielded to give voice to those history had tried to silence. In the 20th century, a profound shift occurred, a conscious effort to document the experiences of the marginalized, the everyday workers, the women, and the indigenous communities whose lives were the hidden scaffolding of epic events. At Columbia University, a pioneer named Alan Nevins established the first formal oral history archive, championing the idea that the emotional truth and contextual nuance of a first-hand account were indispensable. He argued that the feeling in a person's voice, the pause before a painful memory, the cadence of their speech, these were historical data every bit as vital as a treaty or a tax roll. The writer and broadcaster Studs Terkel, who spent decades listening to ordinary Americans, understood this deep human need perfectly. He observed that people are hungry for stories that connect them to something larger than themselves. His own collections of interviews on topics like the Great Depression and working lives became bestsellers, proving that the public craved these intimate, unvarnished chronicles. The methodology of these modern memory keepers is both technical and deeply ethical. They use high-fidelity recording technology to create perfect digital copies, but they also approach each interview with a rigorous protocol of informed consent, ensuring the narrator retains control over their own story. This practice challenges the very definition of a reliable chronicle. Is a memory with its inherent subjectivity and emotional shading less factual than a general's after-action report? Oral historians would argue it is simply a different kind of truth, one that captures the human impact of history in a way official records deliberately avoid. Consider the monumental slave narrative collection of the 1930s, where interviewers, despite their own biases, recorded the haunting voices of the last generation born into slavery. Their testimonies provided a devastating, grassroots counter-narrative to the sanitized versions of the antebellum South. Similarly, projects dedicated to collecting the stories of Holocaust survivors or civil rights activists ensure that the monumental struggles of the 20th century are remembered not just through legislation and headlines, but through the piercingly personal accounts of those who lived them. This work is also a profound act of community empowerment. Across Native America, tribal historians are urgently recording the knowledge of their elders, from medicinal plant uses to creation stories, seizing the power to define their own heritage from the hands of outside anthropologists. These projects are not just about preserving the past, they are about cultural healing and identity reclamation for the future. The ethical considerations are constant companions in this work. How does an interpreter handle traumatic memories without causing further harm? What responsibility does the historian have when a narrator's account contradicts the established historical record? The modern oral historian walks a delicate line, honoring the sanctity of personal memory while acknowledging its complexities. In doing so, they have reignited the oldest form of chronicling, transforming it into a vital tool for building a more inclusive and deeply human history. A single click can now summon an entire civilization back to life. A historian building an interactive timeline of the Silk Road does not just list dates, she layers satellite images of desert caravanserais with translated merchant ledgers, three-dimensional models of lost cities, and audio of folk songs from along the route. This is the new frontier of the epic chronicle, a dynamic, living document woven from threads of data, where you are no longer a passive reader but an active explorer, charting your own path through history. Digital technology has fundamentally rewritten the rules of preservation, transforming chronicles from static monuments into fluid, hypertext narratives that can be endlessly remixed and experienced. Roy Rosenzweig, the visionary founder of the Center for History and New Media, championed this radical shift, declaring that digital history offers a radical promise to make history more democratic, more capacious, and more open to experimentation. This promise is fulfilled in platforms like Wikipedia, where amateur enthusiasts and academic experts collaborate in a global, real-time scriptorium, constantly updating and refining our collective story. Digital libraries have flung open their doors, placing millions of scanned manuscripts and photographs onto the smartphones of people who might never set foot in a university archive. These tools are not just for display, they are powerful analytical engines. Geographic information system mapping can plot the spread of the Black Death across medieval Europe, revealing patterns of transmission invisible to a monk writing in his cell. Text mining software can sift through thousands of Victorian novels to track the evolving use of a single word, uncovering hidden cultural shifts. Three-dimensional modeling can digitally reconstruct the Roman Forum, allowing us to walk its streets and understand its scale in a way no written description could ever provide. Projects like the Valley of the Shadow Archive embody this interactive spirit, letting users trace the lives of individual soldiers and families in the American Civil War through their personal letters and local newspapers, creating a deeply personal and multifaceted narrative of the conflict. But this new digital realm is not without its own profound vulnerabilities. The very platforms that give these chronicles life are also astonishingly fragile. A crucial hyperlink can succumb to link rot, vanishing forever. File formats become obsolete, locking away priceless data in digital tombs. The sheer volume of information creates a tidal wave of noise, where deliberate misinformation can spread as quickly as verified fact. How does the fleeting nature of a tweet compare to the stubborn endurance of a fired clay tablet? The modern chronicler now bears a new set of responsibilities, fighting not against physical decay but against digital oblivion and the pollution of the historical record. This transformation, however, has sparked a profound democratization of memory. With a smartphone in every pocket, everyone has the potential to become a storyteller, to record a personal testimony, to digitize a family photo album, or to contribute to a crowdsourced archive of a disappearing world. The epic chronicle is no longer the sole property of kings and clerics. It is being written by all of us in real time, preserving the civilizations of today for the curious minds of tomorrow. Homer's Troy stands as a ghost in the landscape, a city of both stone and song. For centuries, the Iliad was considered pure myth, a thrilling story of heroes and gods with no basis in reality. Then, the driven amateur archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann, guided by Homer's verses as his map, began digging at a mound in Hisarlik, Turkey. He uncovered not just one city, but multiple layers of ancient settlement, including a level scarred by the fires of a great war. Suddenly, the epic was not merely a poem, it was a chronicle rooted in a tangible, violent past. This discovery created a profound puzzle for historians. The Trojan War, as described by Homer, is filled with divine interventions and superhuman heroes, elements that belong to the realm of myth. Yet, the archaeological evidence suggests a real, devastating conflict between the Mycenaean Greeks and the powerful city guarding the Dardanelles. The epic chronicle exists precisely in this blurred space, using the symbolic power of myth to convey the cultural trauma and heroic ideals born from a real historical event. The historian Herodotus, often called the father of history, understood this duality intimately. He wrote that he was obliged to tell what is said, but not obliged to believe it, perfectly capturing the chronicler's dilemma when faced with legendary material. He recorded the stories he heard from Egyptian priests and Persian magi, presenting them for his audience to weigh, even when they stretched credulity. This is not a failure of history, but an acknowledgement of its deeper layers. The scholar Mircea Eliade argued that myths provide a sacred history for societies, a template of events that took place in a primordial time and serve as a model for all human activities. They are not meant to be factual reports, but foundational stories that connect a people to the cosmos and give a sacred meaning to their existence. Consider the Icelandic sagas. These family chronicles meticulously document the settlement of Iceland, naming specific chieftains, detailing blood feuds, and describing voyages with geographical precision that has been verified by modern archaeologists. Yet woven into these same narratives are encounters with trolls, prophetic dreams, and revenants returning from the grave. For the medieval Icelanders, this was not a contradiction. The supernatural was an accepted dimension of their historical reality, a way to explain fortune, fate, and the human psyche. In China, the ancient bamboo annals present a similar fusion. They record the reigns of early kings and dynasties with chronological lists, but also include accounts of dragons appearing at court and other omens. These elements were not seen as fictional distractions, but as integral signs from heaven that validated or condemned a ruler's mandate. Modern science is now learning to listen to these ancient stories. A field called geomythology investigates the geological roots behind global myths. Widespread flood stories, like the one in the Epic of Gilgamesh, are now examined alongside data on post-glacial sea level rise, which would have been a catastrophic, real memory for coastal societies. The story of the Atlantis-like city of Helike in Greece, which was said to have been swallowed by the sea, was long considered a moral fable until archaeologists discovered its ruins, buried by a massive earthquake and tsunami in 373 BC. So how do we balance our modern skepticism with a genuine appreciation for these epic narratives? The answer lies in understanding that they operate on multiple levels of truth. A chronicle can be factually inaccurate by our standards, yet psychologically and culturally profound. It can preserve the memory of a real earthquake within the framework of a god's wrath, and in doing so, it captures the terror and the search for meaning that the event provoked. These stories were the vessels for a civilization's deepest fears, its highest aspirations, and its most hard-won wisdom. They remind us that the human mind does not remember in cold, hard facts alone, but in the powerful, enduring language of symbol and story. A princess in a Constantinople tower held a secret weapon far more potent than any sword. Anna Komnene, daughter of the Byzantine Emperor Alexios Komnenos, used her exile to compose the Alexiad, a sweeping 15-volume chronicle of her father's reign. This was no dry official history, but a vibrant tapestry woven with sharp political analysis, vivid military strategy, and aching personal reflections on her family's triumphs and tragedies. She wrote not as a distant observer, but as an insider who had walked the palace halls and understood the weight of the crown. Yet for centuries, male historians dismissed her work as the biased lament of a deposed heir, failing to see the masterpiece of historical literature right before their eyes. Anna Komnene was far from alone. Women have always been chroniclers, but their voices were systematically anonymized in collective convents, their works attributed to male scribes, or belittled as mere domestic diaries unworthy of the historical canon. In the 10th century, the German canoness Hrsvitha wrote not only spiritual poems but also historical chronicles, boldly declaring that she would not let the talents God gave her go to waste. In the Mughal court, the Princess Gulbadan Begum penned the Humayun Nama, a biography of her brother, the Emperor Humayun. Her chronicle eschewed the typical focus on grand conquests, instead offering a rare, intimate portrait of the royal household, detailing family relationships, pilgrimages, and the emotional world behind the veil of power. These women wrote from the unique vantage points their societies allowed them, emphasizing social history, kinship networks, and the emotional landscapes that official chronicles ignored. The 15th century French author Christine de Pizan launched a direct challenge to this intellectual exclusion. She argued that if it were customary to send little girls to school and to teach them the same subjects as boys, they would learn just as fully and would understand the subtleties of all arts and sciences. Her own work, The Book of the City of Ladies, was a monumental chronicle of women's achievements throughout history, a deliberate counter-narrative to the misogynist texts of her time, built to defend her sex against centuries of slander. Women chroniclers often excelled in genres that male historians considered marginal. Personal memoirs, collections of letters, and spiritual journals became their vehicles for documenting history. In Japan, Sei Shonagon's Pillow Book captured the intricate rituals and delicate aesthetics of the Heian court with breathtaking wit and precision, preserving a world that would have otherwise been lost to time. The letters of someone like Héloïse to Abelard are not just love letters, they are profound chronicles of theology, philosophy, and the painful constraints placed on a brilliant woman's life. These works provide an invaluable window into the daily life and private spheres that official histories rarely deign to cover. How did the constraints of gender shape the very content of these chronicles? Often writing from the sidelines, women documented the consequences of war on the home, the politics of the nursery, and the intellectual currents of the salon. Their works were frequently more relational, more attentive to the human cost of grand events, and more skeptical of the public boasts of powerful men. Recovering these voices does not just add a few new names to the historical record, it fundamentally expands our understanding of the past. It forces the epic chronicle to include the intimate, the domestic, and the marginalized, stitching the private tapestry of daily life onto the grand canvas of kings and empires, finally giving us a picture that is not just larger, but immeasurably more complete and more human. A chronicle can be the ultimate act of statecraft, weaving gods and mortals into a single unbroken line of power. In 8th century Japan, the ruling Yamato court faced a critical challenge: how to unify a fractured land of competing clans under a single, unquestionable authority. Their solution was not just a military campaign, but a literary one. They commissioned the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki, two monumental chronicles that traced the imperial family's lineage directly back to the sun goddess Amaterasu. This was not ancient folklore being recorded. It was a powerful new political identity being written into existence. By declaring the emperor a direct descendant of the gods, these texts provided a divine mandate for central rule, transforming a regional chieftain into the heavenly sovereign of a newly conscious nation. The French scholar Ernest Renan once remarked that getting its history wrong is part of being a nation. He understood that national identity often rests not on a perfectly accurate past, but on a shared story, a collective agreement about a common heroic origin and a shared destiny. These foundational chronicles become the bedrock of education and public ritual, repeated in classrooms and celebrated in national holidays until their narratives feel as natural as the landscape itself. In medieval England, Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britanniae provided a glorious, if largely mythical, history for a kingdom, populating its past with the legendary King Arthur and tracing its founders back to the fallen heroes of Troy. This gave the Norman rulers who followed a deep, prestigious history to legitimize their own reign over the land. The Domesday Book, commissioned by William the Conqueror, served a more pragmatic political purpose. It was a massive survey of every piece of property and every taxable subject in England. This was not a chronicle of glorious battles, but a dry administrative record that, in its sheer comprehensiveness, became a tool of immense power, consolidating Norman rule by cataloguing the very empire they now possessed. In the 20th century, this instrumental use of history reached its zenith in the Soviet Union, where state historiography was relentlessly rewritten to fit ideological needs. The complex reality of the Russian Revolution was streamlined into a myth of inevitable proletarian victory, and figures like Leon Trotsky were literally airbrushed out of official photographs and history books, their roles erased to serve the political purity of the Stalinist narrative. Yet this political tool is not wielded solely by those in power. Chronicles can also be powerful weapons of resistance. For centuries of diaspora, Zionist scholars and writers meticulously chronicled Jewish history, language, and connection to the land of Israel, building a compelling historical narrative that was essential to the movement for national self-determination. Across Africa, oral historians under colonial rule secretly preserved the epic chronicles of their peoples, from the Mali Empire to the Zulu Kingdom, safeguarding these stories as a sacred trust. They knew that if the colonizer could destroy a people's history, he could more easily destroy their spirit. This enduring power forces us to ask a difficult question of our own time. What is the modern historian's responsibility when deconstructing these long-cherished, politically charged narratives? Uncovering the myths within a national story can feel like an act of betrayal, yet it is also a necessary step toward a more honest and inclusive identity. The true challenge for today's storytellers is not to destroy these foundational chronicles, but to reframe them, to expand the narrative so it acknowledges past silences and complexities. Can a chronicle be reshaped to celebrate a nation's heroes while also acknowledging its victims? Can it foster unity not by ignoring difficult truths, but by embracing a more complete, and therefore more human, story? The political dimension of every epic reminds us that the past is never truly past. It is a story we choose to tell about ourselves, and the teller always holds a piece of the future. A 70-meter-long embroidered cloth holds an entire conquest in its threads. The Bayeux Tapestry is not a written history of the Norman invasion of England. It is a visual chronicle in wool and linen, where the drama of the Battle of Hastings unfolds in a vibrant, continuous narrative that even the illiterate could understand and remember. This masterpiece exemplifies a universal human impulse to use images to chronicle our past with an immediacy words alone cannot always capture. From the intricate murals in Egyptian tombs depicting a pharaoh's divine deeds to the sprawling Japanese emaki scrolls that illustrate the romantic intrigues of the tale of Genji, civilizations have consistently developed sophisticated visual languages to preserve their epic stories. The art historian E.H. Gombrich noted that the visual image is the most accessible and memorable form of communication, capable of conveying complex ideas instantly. This was their power. A peasant who could not read a Latin chronicle could look upon a stained glass window or a painted church wall and see the story of a saint's martyrdom or a king's coronation, feeling the awe and moral lesson in a single glance. These visual chronicles were often collaborative efforts between scribes and artists, as seen in the Tres Riches Hures du Duc de Berry, where lavish illuminations of courtly life and seasonal labors were painted alongside religious texts, creating a layered record of both the sacred and the mundane. The pre-Columbian Aztec codices were similarly rich, painted on bark paper or deerskin to document everything from cosmology and tributes to history, until countless were tragically burned by Spanish missionaries who saw them as idolatrous. This act of destruction itself proves how potent these image-based histories were perceived to be. How did these artists convey complex ideas like the passage of time or a character's importance without a single written word? They relied on a sophisticated grammar of visual storytelling. In Egyptian tomb art, the size of a figure directly indicated their social hierarchy, with the pharaoh always depicted as the largest. Japanese emaki scrolls used a technique called continuous narrative, where the same character would appear multiple times within a single landscape, guiding the viewer's eye through the sequence of events as they unrolled the story from right to left. Even a map could function as a chronicle. The Tabula Peutingeriana, a copy of a Roman road map, is not just a geographical guide. It is a vivid visual record of the empire's connectivity. Its illustrations of cities, temples, and rest stops chronicling the sheer scale and engineering marvel of Roman civilization. These works were never neutral. They were powerful tools of propaganda and cultural memory. The Bayeux Tapestry, likely commissioned by the Normans, tells the story of their conquest from a distinctly Norman perspective, justifying William's claim to the English throne. What happens when we read these visual chronicles against the grain of their written counterparts? They can challenge the official written record, offering clues about daily life, material culture, and the perspectives of the conquered or the marginalized that scribes might have ignored. The integration of image and text creates a richer, more multidimensional epic, one that speaks to our eyes and our hearts simultaneously, ensuring the story is not just known, but felt and remembered on a profoundly human level. A soldier's shovel strikes stone in the mud of the Egyptian delta, and with that single, random impact, a lost civilization begins to speak again. The Rosetta Stone was not merely an ancient artifact, it was a cryptographic key. Its surface, inscribed with the same decree in Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic script, provided the critical crib sheet that allowed Jean-Francois Champollion to finally crack a code that had been silent for over 1,000 years. Suddenly, the voices of pharaohs, the rituals of priests, and the daily chronicles of the Nile were no longer just beautiful, mysterious pictures. They were a readable history, flooding back into the human story after centuries of silence. This was not a unique miracle, but a pattern. Epic chronicles have a habit of surviving against all odds, often through sheer, blind luck, waiting in forgotten spaces for the right moment to be found. The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered by a Bedouin boy chasing a stray goat into a desert cave, his hands brushing against clay jars that held the oldest known copies of the Hebrew Bible. The charred papyri of the Villa of the Papyri in Herculaneum were carbonized by the volcanic fury of Mount Vesuvius, a catastrophic act of preservation that now allows sophisticated imaging technology to unroll and read their philosophical texts. Even the great epic of Gilgamesh itself was lost for millennia, its cuneiform tablets buried in the rubble of Nineveh until 19th century archaeologists pieced together the story of the king who quested for immortality. The classicist Mary Beard perfectly captures the spirit of this endless quest when she notes that we are always looking for the past in the present, and the present in the past. Every discovery is a conversation across time, shaped as much by our own questions as by the answers the past provides. This dynamic is vividly clear in the controversies that often erupt upon a major find. The Vinland map, hailed as evidence of Viking presence in North America, is now widely suspected to be a brilliant modern forgery, a reminder that the desire for a certain past can sometimes cloud our judgment. The Nag Hammadi Library, a collection of Gnostic Gospels found in a sealed jar in Egypt, radically altered our understanding of early Christianity, presenting a version of the faith that was suppressed and lost for centuries. And with every such revelation comes an urgent ethical debate. Who truly owns these rediscovered chronicles? The arguments over the Parthenon marbles, taken from Athens by Lord Elgin, or the bust of Nefertiti, housed in a Berlin museum, force us to confront difficult questions of cultural patrimony and the rights of modern nations to reclaim the physical anchors of their history. Modern technology has become our greatest ally in this search. Multispectral imaging can now peer beneath the surface of palimpsests, manuscripts that were scraped clean and reused, revealing the priceless older texts that were thought to be erased forever. LiDAR lasers scan dense jungles from above, mapping the outlines of lost Mayan cities and Khmer temples invisible to the naked eye. satellite imagery identifies buried ruins in the deserts of Peru, suggesting that countless chronicles inscribed on stone, clay, and parchment still lie hidden, waiting for their moment of return. What does this endless cycle of loss and rediscovery tell us about the fragility of our collective memory? It reveals that civilization is not a continuous, unbroken line, but a story punctuated by silences. A library can burn, an empire can fall, and a language can die, severing our connection to a whole world of thought and experience. Yet the persistent rediscovery of these chronicles offers a profound hope. It suggests that the past is never fully gone, only waiting in the shadows for a new light to be shone upon it, for a new generation of interpreters to listen closely and revive its stories once more. The scent of burning papyrus is the smell of a universe disappearing. When the Library of Alexandria fell, it was not just a building that was lost, but entire civilizations, their voices extinguished in a single, catastrophic fire. Centuries later in the Yucatan, the Spanish friar Diego de Landa orchestrated a similar act of obliteration, gathering Maya codices and setting them ablaze in a great auto-da-fe, convinced he was saving souls while he was in fact erasing unique worldviews forever. This is the shadow that has always followed the epic chronicle, the constant threat of annihilation from war, natural disaster, ideological fury, or simple, corrosive neglect. Against this relentless tide of loss, the keepers of these stories have been forced to become guardians, inventing desperate, ingenious strategies to ensure their survival. During the Viking raids, Irish monks would wrap their precious gospel books in leather satchels and flee into the bogs, protecting the illuminated pages with their own lives. In the 20th century, librarians in Sarajevo did the very same thing, smuggling rare books and manuscripts through sniper fire during the brutal siege, a testament to the same ancient, defiant spirit. The writer Jorge Luis Borges captured this duality perfectly when he envisioned the universal library as a sphere whose exact center is any one of its hexagons and whose circumference is inaccessible. His words evoke both the infinite wonder of accumulated knowledge and its profound, haunting fragility. This race against time takes many forms. Medieval monastic scriptoria would operate as emergency copying centers upon hearing news of an approaching army, scribes duplicating texts in a frantic effort to ensure at least one copy would survive the coming destruction. In our own time, amidst the ruins of the Syrian civil war, archivists have undertaken a similar digital triage, scanning and backing up thousands of historical documents and photographs, creating virtual copies to be stored safely in the cloud, far from the physical bombs. On a global scale, programs like UNESCO Memory of the World work to identify and shield our most vulnerable documentary heritage, from the painfully intimate diary of Anne Frank to the revolutionary Gutenberg Bible, treating them as irreplaceable pillars of our shared human story. Why do individuals and entire communities repeatedly choose to risk everything for stories written on parchment or stored as bits of data? It is because they understand that to lose a chronicle is not merely to lose information. It is to surrender a piece of our collective soul, to sever a vital connection to who we are. The survival of these narratives now faces a new suite of threats, from rising sea levels that threaten coastal archives to the silent, invisible menace of cyber attacks that could corrupt or erase entire digital libraries in an instant. Their continued existence demands more than just luck. It requires our conscious, unwavering commitment, a promise passed from one generation to the next to be the guardians the stories deserve. A single story about Alexander the Great transformed as it traveled, becoming a Persian epic, an Ethiopian spiritual text, and a Malay adventure tale. This was the power of the Alexander Romance, a legendary chronicle that demonstrates how narratives become truly global. It was not a static biography, but a living, breathing entity that absorbed the flavors of every culture it touched. In its Persian version, Alexander became a noble hero, while in Ethiopia he was woven into the lineage of their own kings, his journey imbued with local religious significance. This was not a distortion of history, but an act of cultural adoption, a way for diverse peoples to claim a piece of a world-famous story and make it their own. Civilizations connected through the arteries of trade and conquest created hybrid narratives that reflected shared human fascinations with power, mortality, and the unknown. The travels of Marco Polo, though questioned by some, opened a window onto the dazzling court of Kublai Khan for a European audience, sparking a curiosity about the East that would last for centuries. Similarly, the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea was less a chronicle of kings and more a practical sailor's guide to the ports and products of the Indian Ocean, a document of commercial and cultural connection that linked Rome with India and beyond. The anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss once observed that the wise man doesn't give the right answers, he poses the right questions. These transcultural chronicles did exactly that, prompting intercultural dialogue rather than delivering definitive, unchanging truths. They invited readers to ask, how do others live? What do they value? How are their stories similar to our own? This process of translation and adaptation was not always clean or accurate. As Buddhist Jataka tales, stories of the Buddha's past lives, traveled from India along the Silk Road to China, Korea, and Japan, their characters, settings, and even moral lessons subtly shifted to resonate with local artistic traditions and spiritual beliefs. A story born in the Indian tropics might find new life in a Japanese mountain village, its core message of compassion remaining, but its cultural clothing entirely transformed. The Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang embodied this quest for cross-cultural understanding. His detailed chronicle of his 17-year journey to India was not just a spiritual memoir. It was a monumental work of ethnography, geography, and history that brought a sophisticated understanding of Buddhist philosophy and Indian society back to China, inspiring countless others. Today, our digital world allows for the instant sharing of historical content, creating a new kind of global chronicle. Yet this interconnectedness raises urgent questions about cultural appropriation and the risk of homogenizing unique local narratives into a single, bland story. How do these interconnected histories challenge the ethnocentric view that any one civilization stands at the center of the human story? They remind us that our past is a conversation, not a monologue, a magnificent tapestry woven from countless threads, each one essential to the pattern. The globalization of Chronicles does not erase our differences, it celebrates them, revealing a common humanity forged through the endless, restless exchange of stories. A chronicler's hand hesitates over the parchment, caught between the duty to record and the urge to act. This is the storyteller's ancient and unending dilemma, the ethical fault line that runs through every epic chronicle. When a historian like Thucydides chronicled the brutal Peloponnesian War, he consciously chose a detached tone, believing that an objective account of the plague's horrors and political betrayals would serve as a possession for all time. He prioritized the cold clarity of the record over any immediate call to intervene, trusting that future generations would learn from the grim truths he preserved. Yet this very stance raises a profound question. Does the observer, by merely recording, become complicit in the suffering they describe? The philosopher Cicely Bock reminds us that trust in the truthfulness of others is the foundation of social life. When a chronicler distorts or omits a crucial fact, that foundation cracks. The choice to bear witness is itself a moral act, one that can validate the experiences of the oppressed and hold the powerful to account. Consider the journalists and citizens who secretly documented the atrocities of the Holocaust. Their photographs, diaries, and hidden films were not just records. They became evidence in courtrooms, sacred texts for mourners, and an unanswerable rebuke to those who would later deny the horror ever happened. Yet this necessary act of truth-telling forces another difficult choice. How does one convey the depth of such trauma without reducing victims to mere symbols of their suffering, or worse, turning their agony into spectacle for a distant audience? This tension between transparency and sensitivity extends deep into the realm of cultural heritage. Many indigenous communities hold sacred narratives that are not meant for public consumption. These stories are not simply information. They are living, spiritual knowledge integral to a community's identity and well-being. For an outsider to record and publish them without permission is not an act of preservation, but a form of cultural theft. It violates the privacy of the spirit and severs the story from the traditional guardians who understand its true context and power. Here, the ethical chronicler must balance a desire for a comprehensive historical record with a profound respect for cultural sovereignty, recognizing that some truths are not theirs to tell. Our digital age has magnified these ethical challenges exponentially. A single post documenting a protest or a personal testimony of abuse can circle the globe in moments, empowering movements for justice. But that same digital record is permanent. It can be weaponized to identify and endanger vulnerable individuals, or its context can be stripped away, creating a distorted narrative that lives forever online. The chronicler now must consider data privacy, the risk of digital surveillance, and the terrifying speed with which misinformation can pollute the historical record. What responsibility does a storyteller have to protect the identities of their sources in a world without forgetting? These dilemmas reveal that chronicling is never a neutral act. It is a series of choices about what to include, what to omit, and whose perspective to center. The storyteller is always both an observer and a participant, wielding a power that can either heal or harm. So what frameworks guide ethical storytelling today? They are built on principles of consent, cultural respect, and a commitment to minimizing harm while maximizing truth. The most profound chronicles understand that their ultimate purpose is not just to inform, but to serve human dignity. They remind us that every story is a fragile vessel, carrying not just facts, but the weight of memory and the hope for justice. An algorithm quietly reads 1,000,000 forgotten letters, assembling a history no single human could ever write. The next evolution of the epic chronicle is already here, moving from the digital archive to the intelligent, predictive mind of artificial intelligence. These emerging technologies promise to transform our relationship with the past, offering tools that can translate lost languages, reconstruct fire-damaged manuscripts line by line, and simulate complex historical scenarios with staggering detail. Imagine a scholar asking a machine to cross-reference every mention of monsoon patterns in Indian Ocean, trade logs with political upheavals in Rome, revealing a hidden chain of cause and effect that took centuries to unfold. Projects like Google's Ngram Viewer provide a glimpse of this potential, allowing us to track the rise and fall of ideas across millions of books in an instant. Yet this power comes with profound questions. The historian Yuval Noah Harari reminds us that humans think in stories, and we try to make sense of the world by telling stories. If we outsource too much of that sense-making to algorithms, do we risk losing the narrative soul of history itself? An AI trained primarily on Western texts might inadvertently perpetuate historical biases, overlooking the rich chronicles of other cultures or framing all events through a narrow, data-driven lens that misses the nuance of human emotion and chance. The very objectivity we seek could be an illusion programmed by our own selective data. Beyond analysis, the experience of history is also shifting. We are approaching a future where you will not just read about the siege of Constantinople, but stand on the walls in virtual reality, hearing the thunder of cannons and witnessing the chaos unfold around you. These immersive chronicles could create an empathy for the past that a written page never could. At the same time, blockchain technology offers a way to create tamper-proof, decentralized archives, securing our most vital records against censorship or political manipulation, ensuring that the foundational stories of a people cannot be erased by a single authority. But will a perfectly secure, algorithmically generated chronicle still leave room for the beautiful accident? The scholar who finds a crucial document misfiled in a box, the archivist who senses a hidden connection between two seemingly unrelated lives. These serendipitous discoveries are the lifeblood of historical understanding. A sterile, optimized digital environment might efficiently answer the questions we think to ask, but it could fail to inspire the ones we have not yet imagined. The central challenge before us is not technological, but human. How do we harness these tools to create more inclusive, multidimensional chronicles without letting the machine's logic overwrite the storyteller's heart? The future epic must be a collaboration where artificial intelligence handles the scale and the data, while human wisdom provides the context, the ethics, and the timeless power of a story well told. This partnership will determine whether the chronicles of tomorrow are cold repositories of information or living, breathing narratives that continue to define who we are. The quiet hum of a data server now carries the same sacred charge as a monk's whispered prayer. Our journey from the oral bard to the digital archivist reveals one unbroken thread. The epic chronicle is the lifeblood of civilization itself. These stories are far more than a record of events. They are the vessels for our collective soul, preserving the laughter, the grief, the triumphs, and the hard-won wisdom that define the human experience across the ages. We have walked alongside the scribe in his candlelit scriptorium, the court historian navigating treacherous political waters, and the modern oral historian capturing a voice that trembles with memory. Each one, often under dire circumstances, made a choice to document their world, driven by the conviction that the future deserves to know its past. The enduring themes that echo through their work are not abstract concepts. They are the very pillars of our shared identity, a relentless pursuit of truth against the tide of oblivion, and a profound resilience that insists our stories must survive. The writer William Faulkner once observed that the past is never dead, it is not even past. He understood that these chronicles are not static relics locked away in vaults. They are living, breathing conversations that continue to shape our laws, our conflicts, and our deepest values today. The Epic of Gilgamesh still speaks to our fear of mortality. The struggles recorded in medieval annals mirror our own political divisions, and the personal testimonies of survivors anchor us in the reality of human suffering and strength. This legacy invites a personal reflection. How do the stories you know about your own family, your culture, or your nation shape your perception of the world and your place within the vast continuum of time? Each of us now holds a potential role in this ancient chain of transmission. With a camera in your pocket and the global network at your fingertips, you have the power to document the fleeting moments that will one day become history. You can preserve the story of your community, interview an elder, or simply choose to listen with intention. If this exploration of the guardians of memory has resonated with you, we would be honored to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share which chronicler's story inspired you the most. For more journeys into the mysteries that connect us all, subscribe and join our community. Together, we honor the storytellers who gave us the priceless gift of memory, and in doing so, we each become a chronicler in our own right, ensuring the epic continues.